On July 25, 2014, an emergency broadcast alert was sent out that I'll never forget. It all started out like a regular Friday night. I was driving home after a long day at work with the sun slowly dipping into the background. Long shadows stretched over the open road as I pulled my old truck into my driveway. There sat my little one-story ranch house, almost completely isolated by the fields surrounding it. Just like every day, I went inside, took off my shoes and got to work cooking dinner. Of course, being the 5-star chef that I am, I decided on a ham and cheese sandwich. Gordon Ramsay would be proud. What can I say? It was late and I was tired. So, I sat down on my alarmingly dirty couch and switched on the local news, detailing all the mundane happenings of middle of nowhere, USA. The reporter stood in front of a green screen, pointing at the week's forecast when suddenly my TV screen went black. The familiar monotone beep of a severe weather alert blared through my speakers as I sighed. Typical. It was probably just a wind warning, or so I thought. The barely audible man spoke through garbled static, his sharp words filling my living room. This is an emergency broadcast alert for Custer County. At 7:18 CST, a large mass of storm clouds appeared over the area, accompanied by winds in excess of 70 miles per hour. It is reported that a foreign gas is contained within the storm, resulting in multiple cases of fatal respiratory issues within the county. The DOD is not aware of any impending chemical attack. Do not panic. The CDC advises that shelter is found and residents are not to leave their shelter until an all-clear message is issued. Do not approach any animals or other people, and if entering the gas clouds is required, wear respiratory protection and do not remain exposed for more than 90 seconds. Do not attempt to contact anyone outside the affected alert area. Remain in shelter until further instructions are given. This is not a drill. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't a weather alert. No, this was warning of a disaster. I rushed over to my large front window where I looked out to the rapidly darkening sunset. Sure enough, large black clouds were rushing to fill the sky at an alarming rate. I could already feel the strengthening winds push up against the side of my house. It wouldn't long until whatever this was right on top of me. Normally I'm some sort of situation like this. I would usually stay in my storm shelter out back. But as it turns out, the shelter was built near a natural well, and so there was currently a flooding problem that still hadn't been fixed. Admittedly, I was very freaked out at this point, because although the thought of high winds wasn't all that unusual, the idea of a foreign gas made me uneasy, and fortunately, I had no real way to protect myself. So, I simply hunkered down and prepared for the worst. This wasn't my first storm. Within about 20 minutes the winds were whipping around outside, pressing in my windows and whistling incessantly. At the 40-minute mark, I could hear debris flying around outside as I tried to quietly read a book. The sound of rocks and other objects flying around made an almost rhythmic drumming, almost like the sounds of rain. However, my relative peacefulness was interrupted by the sound of a loud bang against the window next to me, causing me to jump. I carefully moved over to the window, primarily to make sure it wasn't cracked. Outside, laying on the dusty ground below the window, was the body of a crow. It had flown directly into my window. This was strange, but at the same time not impossibly so, as the bird could have possibly been pushed into the window by the strong winds. However, seeing that dead bird made me very uneasy. I knew something was very wrong here. Resigning myself to cleaning up a dead bird later, I sat back down out my couch. Bang! Another loud one. Then another. I looked out again, and to my horror more crows lay dead around my house. As I peered out the window and into the deep dusk, another bird flew right into my face, rattling the window with great force. That one left a small chip in the glass. Within seconds more birds descended on my windows in rapid fire. So many of them flew into my windows that the sound was deafening. I ran back through my house to the only room with just one small window in it, the bathroom. I ducked next to the sink as bird after bird rammed itself into my house, leaving bloody marks and small cracks. The birds were shrieking right before impact, wailing like ghouls in the night. My ears filled with the terrible noises. I covered my ears and closed my eyes to block it all out. I sat there in that corner for what felt like hours. In truth, I have no idea how long it was. But when I finally uncovered my ears, I was again met with only the sound of whistling wind. I cautiously walked back out into the main area of my house, carefully checking for any of this foreign gas I had heard about. Luckily, all of the windows remained intact, though with major structural damage. Though it was hard to see outside, I could see the bodies of hundreds upon hundreds of birds surrounding my house, sitting in piles and scattered about. It didn't make any sense. None of it did. The wind was just starting to die down as the darkness outside thickened. I was hoping that whatever it was would be passing soon, but no all-clear message had been ordered yet. And to make matters worse, as I looked out my windows I could see a thick white blanket of what I hoped to be fog rolling into the area. It quickly descended upon my little block, engulfing the street before quickly moving over the front of the house. The fog swirled and clung to my windows, creating a thin layer of condensation on the inside of the glass. I backed away from the window slowly, worried that this might be the poisonous gas that the broadcast had warned about. I had no respirator and no masks of any kind. I couldn't risk being exposed. As I stood there, trying desperately to figure out what to do, I heard the last thing I would expect in a time like this. Someone had knocked on my door. Filled with curiosity and a growing sense of dread, I approached my door and looked out through the peephole. On the other side was a person wearing a bright yellow jumpsuit, thick rubber boots and gloves, and a large gas mask. I froze in place. Who the hell could possibly be outside? I thought maybe it was someone from the CDC or a rescue team, but they were completely alone. No other people, no vehicle, nothing. I thought maybe I could just ignore them and maybe they'd go away. But before I could think of a plan, the masked person started doing something. They reached into the chest pocket on their jumpsuit and pulled out a small card. Holding it up to the PEPHOLE. It said, "I know you're in there." I backed away from the door, running back towards the bathroom. Along the way, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and proceeded to lock myself into the bathroom. I could still hear them pounding on the door outside, growing louder and more violent with every second. I heard one last loud bang before the sound faded away completely, replaced by the loud thudding of heavy boots against the floor. I clutched my knife, holding my breath, waiting for the worst. With each passing moment I could hear the loud, wheezing breath of the gas mask coming closer and closer. Soon, it stopped right outside my door. Out of time and out of options, I threw open the door to see the person towering over me, holding a large hammer in their hand. They raised it over their head, but before they could strike, I stabbed them directly in the neck, causing the person to fall over. I couldn't stop to process my actions, as a large cloud of thick white mist billowed through the house, enveloping me in its embrace. I couldn't think anymore. I couldn't feel anymore. I couldn't even breathe. I tried harder and harder to move, but it was all futile as the poisonous gas filled my lungs and I sunk down to the ground. The sounds of screams and sirens filled my ears as I sunk into the blackness. I woke up to bright lights in a washed-out room. A man stood over me, watching as I came about. "You're in a hospital," he said. "Can you hear me?" "Yeah, I can. What happened to me?" I asked. The doctor seemed hesitant to reveal the truth. He had a concerned look on his face. "Yesterday, your contractor was coming over to your house to discuss something. He said he found you in the middle of your living room, yelling incoherently." The man hesitated. "He didn't want to tell me what happened next. In your apparently impaired state, you stabbed him with a knife. He passed a couple of hours ago. We did a panel of tests on you, and it seems you had been hallucinating from carbon monoxide poisoning." Now, the next story. The waiting room was unnervingly still, a sterile chamber where even the slightest hint of warmth seemed to vanish. I sat on a stiff plastic chair, my eyes fixed on the blank television mounted on the wall, as the ceaseless hum of fluorescent lights underscored my isolation. The pervasive scent of antiseptic clung to the air, with each inhalation serving as a reminder of the clinical precision that had come to define this place. Above me, an old clock hung on the wall, a relic with ornate hands that defied logic. Its ticking was irregular, sometimes skipping a beat or even running backward for a split second, as if time itself were being tampered with. I found its behavior oddly hypnotic, a silent metronome to the growing dissonance around me. My thumb idly traced the familiar grooves of the old silver bracelet on my wrist, my wife's parting gift, once joked about as a way to remind me, "Just remember you belong to me." Now, Its cool metal served as a bittersweet tether to a life I feared was slipping away. I was frozen there, watching the clock tick by, each irregular tick amplifying the pounding of my heart. As an unsettling silence enveloped me, I could still hear that nurse's calm voice from earlier. "Don't worry, Mr. Baker. It only moves when you move." But as I stared at the operating room door, something felt seriously off. The usual hum of chatter was gone. I looked around and realized the nurse and everyone else had just vanished. The whole hospital felt empty, like I was the only soul left. I leaned forward and mumbled, "Who's there?" But my words were swallowed by a creeping silence, the erratic flicker of lights, and a strange pressure building in my head. That's when I noticed a rippling distortion at the edge of my vision, as if reality itself were torn open. There, lounging in the periphery, was a creature that defied explanation, an interdimensional presence whose form shimmered between hues and shadows, shifting in a way that made it seem neither entirely here nor there. Its unblinking gaze locked onto me, silent and menacing, daring me to make a move. For a long, heart-stopping moment, I stood paralyzed, caught in that creature's overwhelming stare. It moved slowly at first, almost languidly, its form undulating, with an otherworldly fluidity as if it were suspended between dimensions. Every second of that standoff made me feel as though my very soul were being measured against some ancient, incomprehensible standard. I knew instinctively that any movement might provoke it. A silent challenge laid out before me. Its eyes, cold and unyielding, seemed to command stillness, forcing me into an agonizing stalemate, remain frozen and face an eternal confrontation, or risk moving and unleash its wrath. The tension became unbearable. My heart hammered in my ears, and driven by a desperate need to escape, I forced myself to move. With trembling legs, I inched toward an open door down a dim corridor, each step a gamble against the creature's silent threat. Behind me, the clock's hands jerked unpredictably, a visual echo of my every faltering step. In that instant, the interdimensional being sprang into action. Its form shifted abruptly, darting after me with a speed that defied logic, a predatory sprint that blurred the boundaries of space and time. I caught only the eerie sound of its movement, as if it were tearing through the very fabric of reality. No longer a distant menace, it was right on my heels, its intense gaze burning into my back. I raced down those narrow halls, my footsteps echoing my mounting terror. Then, in a narrow stretch of corridor, as I desperately tried to outpace it, I tripped. In that split second, I felt its cold, otherworldly touch, a searing slash of pain along my forearm. The wound burned through my nerves with such intensity that my vision narrowed, and the agony became unbearable. My legs buckled under the onslaught, and the overwhelming pain sent me spiraling into darkness. When I came to, harsh fluorescent lights stabbed at my eyes. I was in a hospital bed, machines beeping in a sterile room that felt all too convincing. My thoughts raced, trying to stitch together the fragmented chaos of the chase, the excruciating pain of the wound, and that oppressive, silent corridor. Above the bed, the same erratic clock now loomed, its maddening dance of contorted hands, a constant reminder that time was no longer trustworthy. A gentle knock on the door pulled me from my disoriented reverie. A nurse entered, her smile crisp and unnervingly cheerful under the glare of the lights. Without missing a beat, she announced in a calm, measured tone, "Mr. Baker, the surgery went well." There was an unsettling precision in her words, as if they were part of a well-rehearsed script. As she adjusted the settings on the monitor with meticulous efficiency, she added, "Your wife will be here soon." Her voice, too serene for the chaos I had just experienced, sent a shiver down my spine. The promise of her arrival, though meant to be reassuring, only deepened the uncanny dissonance that permeated every corner of my mind. The door creaked open, and there she stood. Yet, as she stepped into the room, every movement felt unnaturally delayed, as if invisible strings were pulling her along. Then, her voice, soft and insistent, cut through the sterile silence. "Honey, you don't have to be scared. This is the real deal. You remember everything, right? The hospital, the doctors, our love." My mind reeled, torn between the haunting memories of that waiting room and the gentle cadence of her words. "I don't get it," I stammered, voice trembling. "I saw things, felt something chasing me. That waiting room, it felt all too real." She moved closer, her hand reaching out as if to soothe my frayed nerves. "They were just illusions. Love your mind's way of shielding you from some hard truths. You're safe here. This is where you belong. Her words were hypnotic, a lullaby promising solace after the chaos. For a moment, the seductive pull of her reassurance nearly overwhelmed me. But beneath the surface, a stubborn doubt stirred. And oh, something's off. I can feel it. I don't know if I can trust you. In that instant, her eyes flickered a brief, almost imperceptible glint that sent a chill racing down my spine. She stepped even closer, her smile widening in a manner that felt both inviting and menacing. You're overthinking it, love. Let me help you. Just let go of your fears and accept this. The closer she came, the more I sensed an undercurrent of menace, a subtle distortion in her features, a lag in her movements that defied the natural flow of life. Instinct roared within me, urging escape. With a surge of adrenaline, I shoved her back. The act felt like a betrayal even as it snapped me back to reality. In that charged moment, the air shattered with a sudden, bone-chilling crack. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that stretched like grasping fingers. As I staggered backward, my heart pounded in my ears. And from the far corner of the room, a dark, shifting presence emerged, a being whose form wavered between this world and some other, far more sinister plane. Its eyes, voids of ancient malice, fixed upon me, as it spoke in a voice that was both a whisper and a roar. You never left the waiting room. The walls convulsed as the sterile confines dissolved into a nightmare of swirling shadows and fractured time. I stood frozen, caught between the remnants of a reality I once knew and a terror that refused to relent. In that final, shattering moment, as the boundaries of my world crumbled into darkness, I realized that I had been waiting for myself in that waiting room all along, even before the chase and the chaos began. Trapped in an endless cycle, here I am, once again, sitting in that same cold waiting room. Now, the next story. Before leaving for my house, we had to finish our last class of the day. Fortunately, the session was short. The teacher only reviewed the answers to the midterm and told us he would give us the grades next week. When I saw the answers on the board, I felt myself sinking deeper into my chair. I had made mistakes. I didn't answer exactly what the professor expected, even though my reasoning was valid. The hypothesis I proposed about the boa made sense. The decrease in heart rate and respiratory rate in response to a certain stimulus. I didn't know if that would save me or if my grade would be a disaster. But at that moment, the midterm was the least important thing. When class ended, we left in a group. We didn't talk much on the way. Everyone was lost in their thoughts. The ride home felt endless. My hands were cold and trembling. When we arrived, I tried to take out the keys, but I couldn't get them to fit in the lock. Let me, said Miguel, gently taking them from me. I let him do it. He opened the door easily and there it was. Everything, just as we had left it in the morning. The door was locked with a padlock and internal latch. There were no signs that anyone had forced entry. Daniel was the first to speak. Maybe they came in through a window or the back door. There's only one way to find out, said Laura. We went inside. The first room we checked was the living room. Everything was intact. Too intact. The same order, the same cleanliness. Nothing out of place. Daniel ran up to the second floor. He climbed the stairs two at a time and checked the rooms. When he came down, his expression was a mix of confusion and concern. Everything is fine, he said, as if he couldn't believe it. And then Alejandra broke down in tears. It wasn't a loud cry. It was silent, anguished, as if she were trying to hold it in. I knew why. It wasn't just because of me. It was because she had also received that call. And now, we were more scared than ever. Daniel, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. Listen, we need to calm down, he said, his voice firm but calm. We're letting this affect us too much. How do you want me to calm down? I said, still feeling the tremor in my hands. Nothing makes sense, Daniel. Nothing. I know, but panicking won't help us. The only thing we know for sure is that no one entered the house. Everything is in order. And what about the calls? Alejandra asked with a trembling voice. Daniel sighed. I don't know, but until we understand what's going on, there's something we can do. Don't answer calls from unknown numbers. We all went silent. None of us will answer, Daniel continued. No matter the time, no matter how persistent. If it's a number we don't know, we ignore it. No one argued. It was the most reasonable thing to do. When night fell, Mom finally arrived. She looked exhausted, as always after a long day at work. We sat in the living room, and I asked her, "Mom, this morning you called me to tell me I forgot my phone at home, but I had it with me." She smiled absent-mindedly. "Oh yes, it was my mistake. At first, I thought you'd forgotten it, but then I realized I was calling your number, and you answered. So, I had forgotten my phone." I stared at her. She didn't seem worried at all. I decided to ask her the next thing. "And the calls you made while I was in the midterm?" "Oh, that," she nodded. "I asked my secretary to call you and give you that message, because I was in a meeting. I didn't remember you were in midterms. Sorry if I caused you any trouble." That explained at least part of what had happened. But the most important thing was still missing. "Mom, did anyone answer your phone when I called you?" She frowned, clearly confused. "No, I didn't have my phone all day, and as you see, I just got home. But someone answered ... She shrugged, brushing it off. "You must have dialed the wrong number." "Don't worry, sweetheart, but I'm sure I called yours ... Mom sighed and stood up. "I'm exhausted, dear. We'll talk tomorrow, okay?" She went to her room and closed the door. I didn't feel at ease. I ran to my room and checked the call log. There it was. The call to my mom's cell phone, made exactly at 12 o'clock p.m. It lasted 3:05 minutes. So ... What had that been? I grabbed my phone and wrote in the WhatsApp group. I asked my mom about the calls. Some things make sense, but the call that was answered with my voice still doesn't have an explanation. The messages started coming in almost immediately. "Alejandra, that's still the worst. I don't want to think about what that means ... Miguel, let's try to be rational. Maybe it was a line error, like a cross call or something. Daniel, I don't know, but so far there's nothing we can do. The only thing we know for sure is that Ailes thing happens this Thursday at 3:33 a.m. We all went silent for a few minutes, as if processing that information took longer than usual. "Daniel, I think the best thing is for us to stay together. We can tell our families we're meeting to study for midterms. That way, we'll be together Thursday at that time." It seemed like the best option. No one wanted to be alone with these thoughts. We confirmed that we'd stay at Miguel's house, and after some nervous jokes, we disconnected. I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. This had to be a joke. A horrible joke from someone who had overheard us talking about the creepypasta. Maybe someone manipulated the call. Maybe someone was setting a trap for us. Inside, I wished that were true. Sleep began to take over me. My body relaxed, and my thoughts grew fuzzy. And then, I heard it. A voice, my voice, whispering right in my ear. "Tuesday, 1:04 p.m. My eyes snapped open. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Was that ... my mind? Or had I really heard it? The sound had been so clear, so close, so real. I could swear I even felt a faint warm breath on my ear. I shook my head and tried to calm myself down. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. But still, I knew another sleepless night awaited me. This was moving from strange to unbearable, because Daniel was the next one to receive a call from the unknown number. He tried to act like nothing, as if the calls from unknown numbers didn't affect him. But we all saw it. We saw how the subtle tremor at the corner of his lips betrayed his nervousness. We saw how his cold, sweaty hands gave him away. And we saw him turn completely pale when his phone vibrated on the table in the magnolia garden. We looked at each other tense, but no one said anything. It wasn't necessary, as we had agreed. No one answered, but an uneasy gnawed at me inside. Even though we were avoiding the unknown calls, that didn't mean we were safe. Because my call hadn't been from an unknown number, it had been from my mom's phone. And not only that, I had made the call myself. Had the others noticed, or had their minds blocked it out to avoid panic? I didn't want to mention anything. I didn't want to increase their fear, but I wasn't sure if it was a good idea for them to keep avoiding why the calls from unknown numbers. Classes passed in a strange daze. We were all physically there, but our minds were elsewhere, trapped in the uncertainty of what was going to happen. In the end, I couldn't take it anymore. I skipped the last class and headed to the magnolia garden. I needed to breathe, get away from the routine, and find some calm in the middle of all this. I lay down under the big tree, letting the sounds of nature surround me. I closed my eyes, feeling the cool grass under my hands. For a moment, my mind began to yield to the tiredness until Tuesday, 1:04 p.m. A whisper, my whisper. It wasn't loud, just a murmur, but it pierced me like a cold dagger. I opened my eyes suddenly, my breath shallow. I sat up immediately, rummaging for my phone in my bag. The lit screen reflected the time, 6:03 p.m. The others must have already gotten out of class. With trembling fingers, I wrote in the WhatsApp group, "See you in the second floor lab." I looked around, still sitting on the grass. No one was there. I never thought I'd come to fear my own voice. We met in the lab, and without much preamble, we decided to go to Miguel's house. Thursday, 3:33 a.m. That was the date and time given to Ale. That moment would change everything. Miguel lived in a family house that rented out rooms or entire floors. He had the whole third floor to himself, which meant that night, we'd have a place just for us. Laura, the only one who seemed not to be on the verge of collapse, took care of bringing plates of snacks and glasses of juices and sodas. I had no idea how she could act so normally. We settled into the living room, trying to do anything to keep our minds occupied. We talked, studied, watched movies, whatever we could to make the hours pass more quickly. I took out my phone and checked the time. 8:12 p.m. There were still 7 hours to go until the moment that would decide everything. And the waiting was the worst. Around 1 a.m., we were all scattered around Miguel's floor. Some were asleep, others pretended to be busy, but in reality, no one could escape the feeling that time was closing in on us. The only one I couldn't find anywhere was Ale. A bad feeling ran down my back. So, I got up and started looking for her. I thought about the bathroom. I knocked on the door. "Ale, are you there?" Silence. Then, a muffled whisper. "Leave me alone." I pressed my forehead against the wood, taking a deep breath. "I'm not going to leave you alone." No response. I tried a silly joke, something nonsensical, something to break the thick air that enveloped us all. A few seconds later, the door opened. Elle was sitting on the toilet seat, her eyes red, her face covered in tears. I slid down the wall to sit in front of her. "It's going to be okay," I said, even though I had no way of assuring it. "We're together. Whatever happens, we'll face it." She didn't respond. She just looked at me with a vacant expression. I tried to force a laugh, but it sounded more like a tired sigh. "Also, Ale, you need to be in perfect condition for Tuesday at 1 p.m. Her brows furrowed. "What?" "My day and time. Tuesday, 1:04 p.m. Al blinked, and her expression changed. She stood up, left the bathroom, and sat in front of me. She grabbed my hands tightly, squeezed them, and then placed a warm kiss on them. "We're together," she whispered, "no matter what happens." My throat closed. I felt the tears burning in my eyes, but I forced myself to hold them back. Someone had to be strong here. We went back to the living room. Laura was sleeping on the couch, tangled in a blanket that barely covered her feet. Miguel and Daniel were by the window, the pane open and the cigarette smoke escaping into the early morning. We approached them. Miguel looked at me with an eyebrow raised, silently asking if everything was okay. I answered him with a simple, "Yes." He nodded and passed me his cigarette. I had never smoked. What did it matter now? If something was going to kill me, it wasn't nicotine. Something else was waiting for me. Something with my own voice. The clock read 3:13. A.m. I shook Laura more forcefully than necessary. "Wake up," I murmured, my voice tense. Miguel was serving more coffee in the cups for everyone. I lost count of how many he had already made. 5, maybe 6. My body was trembling, my neurons buzzing like an angry beehive. I didn't know if it was from the caffeine, the cortisol, or the fear. Laura slowly opened her eyes, frowning. "What's wrong?" "The time." Her eyes opened wide. Without saying anything, she took off the blanket, rubbed her eyes, yawned, stretched, and got up to look for Miguel in the kitchen. Elle was in the center of the couch, muttering something to herself. She was holding a small object in her hands, clutching it tightly. I approached and asked her what it was. "Don't laugh," she said with a trembling voice. "I would never." She opened her palm and showed me a tiny rosary, the size of a bracelet. I recognized the shape instantly. My family was Catholic, although I had never practiced. I smiled, trying to lighten the atmosphere. If your mom had known a call would make you a believer, she would have made one years ago. Elle let out a brief, faint laugh. It's incredible how in such horrible moments we all become believers. Or at least hope to get favors, right? I nodded in understanding and wrapped an arm around her. She closed her eyes and sighed. I looked at my phone. 3:30 a.m. Damn it. 3 minutes. This is going to kill me. Aleo was crying in Daniel's arms, who had already turned off his phone to stop receiving calls from the unknown number. She was squeezing her eyes shut tightly, tears running down her cheeks. 1 minute. My leg moved uncontrollably. Laura, sitting next to me, put her hand on my knee to calm me down, but I couldn't help it. 3:33 a.m. We stayed silent, eyes closed, as if we were waiting for an asteroid to hit us. I counted in my head. 30 seconds. I opened one eye. Nothing happened. Alea took a deep breath. We all did, but I didn't relax. Let's wait a little longer, I said. We can't take anything for granted. The minutes became half an hour, then an hour. Nothing. Exhaustion overcame us, and we decided to sleep together in the living room, just in case. At 7 a.m., Alea woke us all up. She was radiant, despite the dark circles. Nothing happened. I'm alive, she said, smiling. It was obvious. The most logical thing. Daniel stretched and said confidently, I told you. We need to find the idiot behind this prank. We all nodded, but I wasn't so sure. Because my call had been different. The sound of a ringing phone broke the silence. It was Laura's. She answered without checking the caller ID. Idiot. Go prank someone else. Ridiculous. She hung up and looked at us with a grimace. The loser prankster called me. Wednesday, 12:08 p.m. The others seemed to relax. Laura was convinced it had all been a bad joke. And most importantly, nothing had happened at 3:33 a.m. They breathed a sigh of relief. But I was still waiting for my call. We left Miguel's house and headed to the university. Classes. More classes. Everyone functioning on half a brain. At the end of the day, we said our goodbyes. Aleo assured us she would be fine. That night, we talked on WhatsApp. Everything was fine. Everything seemed fine. Tuesday came. We were in the cafeteria, having lunch. I was barely paying attention to the conversation. My eyes kept drifting to my phone screen. 2 minutes left. 1:04 p.m., my time. I held my breath as I watched the clock, tracking every second. Trapped in that minute that stretched like infinite chewing gum. Time moved. 1:05 p.m. Nothing. I took a deep breath, as if releasing a weight that had been pressing against my chest. I returned to the conversation with my friends. I smiled. I acted normal. Eventually, Miguel and Daniel also received their day and time, but nothing happened to any of us. We never found the prankster, and the whole thing faded into oblivion. Or at least, for them. Years have passed, but I still think about it. What if it wasn't a joke? What if the day and time were set, just not for that moment? How many Tuesdays at 1:04 p.m. do I have left? Which one will be the last? And my friends, I've lived all this time, hoping I'm wrong. Wow, guys, that one still gives me chills. If you made it to the end, let me know you survived. Don't forget to smash that like button if you enjoyed the terror, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're creeping closer to that 1K goal, and your support means everything. Hit the bell so you never miss a nightmare-fueled upload. Stay spooky, stay safe, and remember, you might want to sleep with the lights on tonight. Until next time, peace out, if you can.